The first podcast is called The Battlefield. What do you think's happening when you're trying to influence somebody? After this podcast, along with other information you will receive in this book, you should understand, among other things, what attitudes are and what purposes they serve. To begin understanding persuasion, influence, manipulating others, you need to understand that most of the time we're trying to change somebody's attitude toward us, attitude toward the job, attitude toward others. And it's important to understand what an attitude is. You might want to reflect for a second and think, what are some of your attitudes? And then I'm going to tell you a definition of attitude that I developed over the years, and I believe it is the best I've ever seen. An attitude is a predisposed tendency to think, act, and feel in a particular way towards something. It could be a person, it could be an idea, it could be an object. The important thing is to realize is that the word predisposed is in there. That means that most of the time, but not always, your attitudes pre-exist a moment. And they direct your behavior. It's a tendency. You're not locked into having to do it. So an attitude is a predisposed tendency to think, act, and feel in a particular way towards something.
Hey, let me jump in right there and lean in and say, you call this the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And so why is it important for students to understand when it comes to persuasion and attitude that this is truly a battlefield?
Well, because we're trying to influence people all the time, and other people are trying to influence us. And if you're a manager or leader in business, you have to have the people skills to lead and get people to do what you want them to do, and there's several ways to come about and do that. And most people have not studied persuasion. I mean, it goes way back to Aristotle, but it's rarely formally taught in colleges and universities today.
And so we have this noisiness, we have this blurriness, we have this distraction in the environment that all of us work in, and we know that managers are there to solve, and leaders are there to solve problems and make decisions. And in this battlefield, you talk about attitudes and you talk about the purposes they serve.
Right, exactly. And the next thing to understand about attitudes is attitudes have been scientifically shown to have three components. One of the components is the emotional component, which is called in the science the affective component. Think about attitudes you have and your emotional attachment to some of them. The second component is the behavioral component. That is your actual action, which can be observed by you and others. And the third one is the cognitive component, which are basically your thoughts. And as we will learn as we take this course together, that these three things have to sort of fit. We have a drive for consistency. Think about it. If you realize you were doing something that didn't feel right to you, what do? You have to resolve that inconsistency between your behavior and your emotions. Or if you were doing something that made you feel bad, and so you want to shift and change that. And in dealing with other people, you realize that they also want to have this consistency among the components of an attitude. We are not comfortable with discrepancies. So one of the examples that I like to use is that attitudes are ego involved, some of them. Basically, some attitudes mean more to us than others. You know, which hamburger you like is one thing. Your religious beliefs, your political beliefs are something else. And when a person's attitude is ego involved, it becomes very, very difficult to change. And some people get ego involved by what they do. When you make a public statement or engage in a behavior that other people can observe, you have to justify your behavior by changing the rest of your attitudes, how you think about it and how you feel about it. And so one of the challenges in persuasion is to get other people to have these three things consistent if they don't happen to be.
And repeat those three things again.
The affective, which is the emotional component, the behavioral, which is how you act, and the cognitive, which are your thought processes.
And all those things together make up our attitudes.
That's exactly right. And the one thing to note is, if I want to change somebody's attitude, just think about it. I only have to change one of those components. If I change one of those components, the pressure on the person is to change the other two to become consistent. If I can change how you feel, aren't you going to change how you act and how you think? If I change how you think, won't you change how you feel and how you act? So all these things work together. And in persuasion, we will find that if I can successfully change one of these components, the others will fall in place. Another thing I want to point out is that it appears that all our attitudes are learned. And I'm just going to give you an example right off the bat. Some people don't understand. They think that some attitudes are everybody has them. That would be an instinct, and doesn't appear to be any instinctive attitudes. But for example, the need for achievement. Not everybody has it. You have it, or you wouldn't be in this program right now.
That's right.
But think about the people that you left behind in high school, the people that you're sitting in class with here at MTSU. You have a need for achievement, and these people don't have it. And the need for achievement, is variable as well. You might just want an A in your classes, somebody else happy with a C, but the need for achievement is learned. And when you're dealing in the workplace, you have to realize somehow that some of these people that are working for you don't have that same drive you have. They don't have that same desire to succeed that you have. And one of your challenges is going to be to change their attitudes to make them reach that point.
I have a serious need for achievement, but I'm a middle child, so it comes naturally for me. Talk to me about, if we're, you gave a whole lot of information there, and I just want to stop for a second and lean in. But if somebody says, hey, if you're a leader or manager and you say, hey, you've got a really bad attitude. Right. Now that if they're armed with this information, how can they unpack that in a way that creates the change that they want to create?
Right, and that's a really good question, because there's several ways to influence somebody. One of the things you can try to do is to make it so that they buy into what you're doing, which actually involves them internalizing the attitude, which is something we will talk about in just a little bit.
Okay.
But you also can use force. They're working for you. You either do it or you're gone. Obviously, we would like to keep resources, so the best thing is for you to be able to change people's attitudes to the point that what we will soon call internalizing it, so it becomes their attitude as well. You want them to buy into your vision. Mm-hmm. I want to make one other point before we leave this discussion of what an attitude is. If you think about it, if I was to put that definition in the plural, predisposed tendencies to think, act, and feel in a particular way toward everything, is that not your personality? Mm. So when I'm trying to change how you think, how you act, or how you feel, I'm actually trying to change your personality. Another thing I would like to point out is that not all attitudes are logical. You certainly have some attitudes, if you reflect, that are not based upon logic. And so sometimes you can't get somebody to change their attitude just by using logic. And that's a frustration people have. Like, you couldn't logically talk somebody into being your significant other. That's an emotional attachment early on. And if you were to try to cognitively explain your emotions, something would get lost. That's sort of left for the poets and the songwriters to do. But not all attitude change. Not all attitudes will change responding to logic. So save yourself some frustration. It's like trying to teach a pig to sing. If a person has an ego-involved attitude, it's going to be really, really hard for them to change that. Now, Dr. Jimville asked us a minute ago, what purposes do attitudes serve for us? And there's a theory by a guy named Katz, K-A-T-Z, that is absolutely great. He talks about the different functions that attitudes serve for us. And there's 4 of them. And I'm going to say them first, and I'm going to go through them one by one. One is called the instrumental, adjustive, and utilitarian function. Other one is value expressive. Third one is knowledge. And the fourth one is ego defensive. So the first of these functions, and they're not in any particular order, is we hold certain attitudes because they are useful to us. They help us meet our needs. They help us adjust to the world. These are things from potty training to the scientific method. These are things that help us relate to society, relate to others, and adjust to what's going on in our world. So again, that's the instrumental, adjustive, or utilitarian function. The next function is the value expressive function. Think about it. Don't you like to talk about your beliefs? How are you doing today? How's it going on? What do you think about this political situation? What do you think about this religious point of view? People like to express their values. Now, introverts are probably less likely to do that than extroverts, but you can get this out of an introvert as well. When you say, here's my favorite song, or maybe you even express yourself by how you dress, the car you drive, the way you fix your hair, the makeup that you put on. All these are ways of expressing yourself, expressing your values. The third function is the knowledge function, and that's exactly what it says. This is a group of facts that we have picked up in the world, and that knowledge actually affects how we engage with the world as well. It's subtly different from the instrumental adjustive utilitarian, because those are there just to help us adjust. But the knowledge function, what we know, acts as a filter for how we perceive the world and how we add on to what we already know. And the fourth function is fascinating to me, and that's that ego defensive function. We hold certain attitudes to protect ourselves from things that threaten us. And so if somebody has an ego defensive function, like somebody's afraid of spiders or something like that, that might be hard to change. But all the therapies that psychologists and psychiatrists use are there to attack one of those components. There's behavior therapy, tries to get the person to change how they behave, like stop smoking, and then see how the cognitive and affective go with it. There's cognitive therapy where you change how the person thinks, and then the behaviors and the emotions should change. And then there's the emotional therapy where you're trying to change how the person feels. And if you change how they feel, you'll change their thought processes and then hopefully their behavior.
And so tell me those four key ideas. When are they most important in leading and managing, leading people and managing resources?
Well, I think if you get people to buy in to what you're doing, then they want to be part of that value expressive function.
Yeah.
They want to, I work for this company. I wear a shirt that says the company on it. I've got a sign in my office. It's really important to get that buy-in, and that comes with changing attitudes, to get them to buy into what they're doing, to take some ownership. That's basically the best one for industry. And sometimes people will have irrational things that keep them from doing what you want them to do. And remember, there are ways to change attitudes without logic, although that might be beyond the scope of this course.
But in those four things, when you're trying to persuade others, understanding those four ideas will allow you to assess other people.
It'll allow you to know that attitude that they have. It lets you know
Yes.
what function that's serving for them.
Okay.
Is this a way of expressing themselves? Like, for example, you wouldn't want to go to a job interview if you were somebody that had a lot of like piercings in your nose and eyes and lips and something like that, because that's expressing yourself, which you have a right to express. But is that the expression that the company wants you to display when you're a representative of them? And so, you want people to have socially acceptable value expressive functions, and you want them to buy into the company.
Got it. So the subtlety here, in terms of tying it back into the title, is that if you understand these four key ideas, then you can look and assess others as well as assess where you need to step in terms of your attitude.
That's exactly right. Once you understand the functions that attitudes serve for people, and you understand the components of an attitude, and realize there are different tactics to try to change that attitude to have the attitude that you want in your employee, then you will be creative, and you will have the ability to be creative in doing this because you understand that concept. That attitudes, most of the time, pre-exist the situation. They're just a tendency, and they have three components: cognitive, affective, behavioral. Think of the ABCs: affective, behavioral, cognitive.
Yeah.
And once you understand how those things work, then you will understand the best way that you think you should approach changing that person's attitude.
While you're in the battlefield.
Well, because it's going on all the time.
Yep.
I'm trying to influence other people. They're trying to influence me. I mean, we see it every day, all day long. Commercials on TV, pop-ups on the phone. We are constantly being influenced by people. And don't ever think for a minute that the employees are trying to influence you.
That's it for the battlefield. Big idea number one is the battlefield. And now you understand the concept behind attitudes and the art of persuasion.